What happens when love collides with betrayal? For Priscilla Presley, the answer to that question would redefine not only her marriage but her entire future. At the heart of their story lies a confrontation, a moment when whispers of infidelity became undeniable, when the man adored by millions could no longer hide behind the glittering mask of fame. For years, Priscilla had chosen to look past the rumors. She wanted to believe that their bond, their family, and their history together were stronger than the temptations that followed Elvis Presley everywhere he went. But love, even when deep, cannot blind someone forever. Elvis was a man who lived in extremes. On stage he was untouchable, the king of rock and roll, a living legend drowned in adoration. Off stage, however, he was a husband and father, bound by the ordinary expectations of family life. It was this very contrast that fueled his restlessness. The applause outside his home never stopped, but within the walls of Graceland, silence reigned. That silence, to Elvis, felt unbearable at times, and he began to chase validation in places that would ultimately wound the woman who had stood by his side since his early days. When Priscilla finally confronted him, it was not just about lipstick on a collar or phone calls that ended too quickly. It was about the life they had built together, the trust that had been fractured, and the child who tied them together forever. She demanded the truth, not the version told to fans, not the stories carefully hidden from the press, but the truth between a husband and a wife. Elvis's answer was not polished, nor was it rehearsed. It was raw, uncomfortable, and devastating. He admitted what Priscilla had feared, that his affairs were not about love, but about escaping the ordinariness of life, about feeling alive in ways he struggled to find at home. It was a confession that changed their marriage forever, not by saving it, but by forcing both of them to face the reality of who he had become and what she could no longer accept. This moment, as painful as it was, reveals the human side of Elvis Presley, not the superstar, but the flawed man who longed for validation, and the woman who loved him enough to demand honesty. The Presley marriage began like a dream, but by the mid-1960s and early 1970s, cracks began to show beneath the surface. Priscilla had been by Elvis's side since her teenage years in Germany, when she first met him during his military service. What began as youthful devotion grew into a marriage that captured the public's imagination, the king of rock and roll with his radiant bride. But behind the glamour, Priscilla often felt the heavy cost of loving a man whose life was consumed by fame. As Elvis's career soared, so too did the temptations surrounding him. The adoration of fans was constant, and it wasn't just applause that followed him. Women waited outside hotels, backstage at concerts, and sometimes even at the gates of Graceland, hoping for a glimpse, a smile, or something more. For Elvis, whose identity was deeply tied to being desired, these moments became intoxicating. Yet for Priscilla, they became unbearable reminders of a love that seemed increasingly divided. Priscilla noticed the signs long before she confronted him: late nights, unexplained absences, the faint trace of perfume clinging to his clothes. Each moment chipped away at the trust they had built. At first, she rationalized it. Elvis was under pressure, his life was different, maybe the rumors were exaggerated. But the quiet doubts grew louder with time, and eventually, the whispers became too sharp to ignore. Elvis's infidelities were not a secret to those close to him. Friends, bodyguards, and members of his inner circle later admitted that his affairs were frequent, often fueled by loneliness, exhaustion, and the constant need for adoration. For Elvis, the spotlight was addictive. It made him feel extraordinary, but when the lights dimmed, he struggled to accept the ordinary rhythms of being a husband and father. Fame had given him everything, but it had also taken something crucial away: the ability to feel content without constant validation. Priscilla, however, was not merely a passive bystander in this story. She was a young woman growing into her own identity, and over time she began to feel the weight of being in Elvis's shadow. Her devotion was real, but so was her pain. She had given up her own independence to live in his world, yet she found herself increasingly isolated in it. Each discovery of his affairs cut deeper, not just because of the betrayal itself, but because it forced her to question whether the man she loved was capable of being faithful at all. When she finally confronted him, it was not out of anger alone, it was out of exhaustion. Exhaustion from holding together a marriage built on secrets. Exhaustion from pretending she didn't see what was right in front of her. This confrontation was inevitable, the result of years of mounting silence, and it would lay bare not just Elvis's infidelities, but his deepest insecurities. In that moment, The public image of Elvis Presley, larger than life, untouchable, faded away. What remained was a man struggling to explain himself, a man torn between the intoxicating power of fame and the quiet demands of love at home. Priscilla's confrontation was not about exposing him to the world, it was about forcing him to face himself. The confrontation began quietly. Priscilla did not raise her voice, and Elvis did not rush to defend himself with the charm that so often disarmed others. Instead, the silence between them carried a weight heavier than any argument could. On the table, the evidence was not photographs from a tabloid, but the years of doubt, the late nights, and the whispered truths that could no longer be ignored. "Elvis," Priscilla said, steady but firm, "I need the truth. No excuses, no half answers. I deserve to know what you said have been doing." For a man who had stood before millions and commanded entire arenas with his voice, Elvis suddenly found himself speechless. He lowered his gaze, as if the floor might offer him an escape from the piercing eyes of the woman who had once believed he was unshakable. He knew denial would only prolong the inevitable. Finally he spoke, his words hesitant but raw. "I don't know how to explain it, Priscilla. It wasn't about not loving you. It wasn't even about them. It was about me." The confession landed like a stone between them. Priscilla felt her breath catch, because in that moment she understood she was not fighting other women, she was fighting the emptiness inside her husband. Elvis leaned back, his voice cracking under the weight of honesty. "When I'm on stage, I'm somebody. I'm Elvis Presley. The crowd screams, they reach for me, and I feel alive. But when the curtain falls, and I come home, it's quiet, and I don't always know how to handle that silence. With them, I felt like I was still the man people worship. At home, I felt ordinary." The words pierced Priscilla in a way she did not expect. She had feared he would say he no longer loved her, that she wasn't enough. Instead, he admitted something more tragic, that he did not know how to feel whole without the endless adoration of strangers. "So you risked our marriage," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You risked Lisa Marie, our family, everything we built, because you couldn't sit with being ordinary." Elvis swallowed hard, the tears in his eyes betraying the image of the unshakable star. "I know how it sounds, but it wasn't about them. It was about filling something inside me. I didn't know how to face. I was afraid that being just me wasn't enough for anyone, not even for you." Priscilla's anger shifted into something heavier, sorrow. In front of her sat not a rock and roll icon, but a man consumed by doubt, by the weight of his own fame. She realized that the affairs were not merely acts of betrayal, they were symptoms of a deeper wound, one that applause and affection could never heal. But sympathy could not erase the truth. "Elvis," she said, her voice breaking, "I understand why you feel that way, but understanding is not the same as accepting. I can accept betrayal as the price of your fame. I can raise our daughter to think this is what love is." Her words hung in the air like a verdict. Elvis nodded slowly, as if each syllable carried the weight of judgment he knew he deserved. For once there were no excuses, no defenses, just the quiet admission of a man whose need for validation had driven a wedge between him and the only woman who had truly known him before the world claimed him. The room was still, but the silence was anything but empty. It was thick, alive with the weight of words that could not be unsaid. Elvis sat slouched, his hands clasped together, staring at the floor like a man who had been stripped of all defenses. Priscilla, standing a few feet away, felt her world tilt in a way that was both heartbreaking and clarifying. For years, she had sensed this moment was coming, now it was here, and there was no turning back. She took a slow breath. "You think being ordinary is a curse. But Elvis, that sips what love is. It sips ordinary. It sips showing up every day, even when the music stops. And if you can see that, then what are we doing here?" Her words sliced deeper than anger ever could. They reached the part of him that feared silence, that dreaded the thought of being unseen, unnoticed. Elvis looked up at her, his eyes wet. For once he wasn't Elvis Presley, the superstar. He was just a man caught between two identities, the legend the world demanded, and the husband he wasn't sure how to be. "Do you want to know the truth?" he asked quietly. His voice trembled, but there was a strange strength in it, as if confessing might finally release him from years of pretense. Priscilla nodded, bracing herself. I had those affairs because I didn't believe I was enough without being Elvis Presley. Every scream, every pair of eyes on me, made me feel like I mattered. When I came home, when I tried to just be your husband, I was terrified that being me wasn't enough. I was scared you'd see through me, that maybe without the fame, without the lights, I was just another man. It was the confession she had never expected to hear. Not denial, not excuses, but the barest truth of all. His fame, the very thing that made him extraordinary to the world, had left him feeling unworthy in the one place where it mattered most. Priscilla Sipp's eyes filled with tears. Elvis, I didn't fall in love with Elvis Presley. I fell in love with you, the boy I met before the world even knew your name. And been waiting, all these years for that boy to come back. Her voice cracked, but her words rang clear. For a brief moment, it seemed like time stopped. Elvis's breathing grew unsteady, as if the weight of her love and her disappointment were too much to bear at once. He leaned forward, pressing his hands to his face. I don't still know if I can be him anymore, he admitted. Been Elvis Presley for so long, I don't still know if there's anyone else left. That admission, more than the affairs, shattered her heart. She realized that the man she loved was at war with himself, and that battle had cost them everything. Fame had given them fortune, recognition, a life most people could never imagine, but it had stolen his sense of self, and with it, the foundation of their marriage. She knelt beside him, her hand trembling as she placed it over his. If you can find that man again, Elvis, then we done, because I can be married to the world his idol. I can only be married to the man I once knew. Elvis lifted his head, meeting her gaze. In his eyes was both desperation and resignation. He wanted to choose her, but he knew the battle against himself might be one he could never truly win. It was in that moment, raw, painful, and unvarnished, that both of them understood the truth. Their marriage, once filled with promise, had changed forever, not because of a single affair, but because fame had taken something they could never get back. The simple, ordinary love that had once bound them together. After that night, nothing between Elvis and Priscilla was the same. The truth had been spoken aloud, and once revealed, it could not be taken back. For Priscilla, his confession was both heartbreaking and clarifying. She understood now that the affairs had not been about love for other women, but about his fear. Fear of being ordinary, fear of fading when the applause stopped, fear that his worth existed only under the spotlight. But understanding did not erase the pain, and it did not rebuild trust. In the weeks and months that followed, their marriage grew heavier with silence. The ordinary moments that once defined family life, dinners at Graceland, time with Lisa Marie, quiet evenings together, now carried the unspoken knowledge that they were slipping further apart. For Elvis, every attempt to bridge the gap felt clumsy, weighed down by guilt and insecurity. For Priscilla, every gesture reminded her of how fragile the foundation had become. By 1972, Priscilla made the decision she had once feared most. She told Elvis she could no longer live in a marriage shadowed by infidelity and uncertainty. She needed to find herself again, outside of his world, outside of the constant pressure of being Mrs. Presley. In her own words, she later described it not as leaving Elvis, but as finding Priscilla. She moved out, and the separation became official. The divorce was finalized in 1973, but unlike many bitter endings, theirs carried a complicated tenderness. On the day they walked out of the courthouse, Elvis reached for Priscilla's hand. Photographers captured the moment, two people who had just ended their marriage, leaving together, still united by something deeper than legal vows. They embraced, and Priscilla later said there was no anger in that moment, only an understanding that while their marriage could not survive, their bond as family always would. For Elvis, the loss was profound. He continued to struggle with fame, loneliness, and the pressures that had haunted him throughout his career, yet he never stopped leaning on Priscilla for comfort. Even after the divorce, he would call her late at night, sometimes just to talk, sometimes to ask for guidance. Despite everything, she remained one of the few people who truly understood the man behind the legend. For Priscilla, the separation allowed her to step out from Elvis's shadow. She began to pursue her own independence, eventually building a career and establishing herself as more than just the wife of the king. But her love for him, though changed, never disappeared. She once said that Elvis was the love of her life, even if they could not remain married. Their story, is not one of fairy tale reconciliation. Instead, it is a story of two people who loved each other deeply, but were torn apart by forces larger than themselves: fame, insecurity, and the relentless demands of being Elvis Presley. The confrontation over his affairs did not save their marriage. It changed it forever, showing Priscilla what she could no longer accept, and forcing Elvis to confront the parts of himself he could not escape. And yet their bond endured. They co-parented Lisa Marie with devotion, and their respect for one another never vanished. Even after the divorce, Priscilla often defended Elvis against harsh criticism, reminding the world that beyond the stage persona was a man who struggled, who loved, and who, despite his flaws, remained unforgettable. In the end, Elvis and Priscilla's marriage was marked not by a fairy tale ending but by a powerful truth. Sometimes love cannot save a marriage, but it can survive beyond it. Their confrontation revealed wounds that never fully healed, but it also preserved a connection that neither time nor divorce could erase. The story of Elvis and Priscilla Presley reminds us that even the most extraordinary love stories are not immune to heartbreak. Their marriage, once filled with promise and devotion, was tested by fame, temptation, and the crushing weight of expectations that few could ever understand. When Priscilla confronted Elvis about his affairs, his answer did not save their marriage, but it did expose a truth that forever changed it. He admitted, with raw honesty, that his unfaithfulness was not about her, nor even about the women he sought out. It was about his fear of being ordinary, his struggle to feel valuable when the lights dimmed and the applause faded. That confession shattered the illusion, but it also revealed the deepest wound in Elvis's life: the burden of being Elvis Presley. It showed how fame, while dazzling, can strip away one's ability to feel whole in the quiet moments that truly define love and family. For Priscilla, it was both devastating and liberating. She understood him better than anyone, but she also realized that love alone could not heal wounds he refused to face, and so she chose herself, even as she continued to care for him beyond their marriage. What makes their story so powerful is not that it ends in reconciliation, but that it ends in truth. Elvis and Priscilla's bond endured, even after divorce, because it was rooted in something deeper than marriage vows. It was rooted in genuine love, shared history, and the family they created together. Their confrontation teaches us that honesty, no matter how painful, is the only path to clarity, and sometimes that clarity means walking away. For us, the lesson is timeless. Love is not about perfection or about constant applause. Love is about presence, honesty, and the courage to face the ordinary moments together. Elvis's struggles remind us that validation from the world will never replace the quiet strength of being truly seen and loved at home. So I leave you with this question: have you ever faced a moment when honesty changed your relationship forever, for better or worse? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this story moved you, remember to subscribe for more untold truths and hidden stories. Because sometimes, the lessons that stay with us the longest come from the places where love and heartbreak meet.